I'm Louisa Peck. I grew up in Seattle. My dad was a law professor. My mom's sort of an art historian. My dad was really, really atheist. For him, academia and freedom from the church were the same thing. So it was a very academic home, and it was a very performance-oriented home. We didn't get love just for being us. We had to do well, perform, make them proud. So I was very academic from the get-go, did really well in school. And I found I liked philosophy classes, and that's where I really got into proving there was no God. So, we'd read someone like Descartes, and he'd do the whole, I think, therefore I am, I have an idea of God, therefore. And I would just tear that argument. I just remember getting so into that paper to just I'm going to prove he's wrong, there's no God. That's ridiculous. I liked modernism because I felt in modernism, people were finally waking up from the dream of this Anglican church and finally facing the darkness, facing this indifferent, cold universe, which was really all there was and no point to life. I had to change schools many times. So by the time I got put in this private high school at 10th grade, they all had friends already. And I just made some what I call camouflage friends so that you're not sitting all by yourself. Finally, senior year, I discovered beer, and I just started finding out where parties were and going and getting wasted. And all of a sudden, people liked me. And I liked me better when I was drunk. So I just kind of play acted this role as if I knew what I was doing and convinced them that that's who I was. But inside, I was like a very nervous actress. Just what should I do now? How am I acting? How am I coming off? How's my performance? And it was such a weird way to live, but it was the only thing I knew. I graduated in 1982, got to New York, and there was Studio 54. There was, I was just sort of trying to live the dream, except for I kept having panic attacks. So I would live the dream by staying drunk enough that I wouldn't have panic attacks. At a certain point, I asked a friend to come down to Manhattan and bring a lot of coke. And so he was a dealer back in college, and he came down, brought a lot of coke. We did a lot of coke in the apartment, and then we took a cab and went to the Peppermint Lounge. I was feeling really, really good, dancing, having fun, and we ran out of cocaine. My life, I was always trying to be cool enough, feel cool enough that I would feel okay. The next party, you're going to finally feel cool. No, this next drink, you're going to finally feel okay. No, you just need this toke of pot, and that's the moment when everything is going to change for you. And I felt I was just right on the cusp of that. I was almost at the point where I would be cool and feel okay, and now we're out of coke. And so we pooled our money and asked around, and somebody said, this guy's selling it. So we bought a gram from him, and he's like, it's good stuff. And he was really kind of cagey, scrawny guy in a beige leisure suit. We started snorting it, and my friend, who was a dealer, was like, this is doing nothing. It's worthless. It's and he kind of just threw down his bill like, we've been had. And I thought, well, it numbed our gums. Maybe it's just bad cocaine, and if I do the whole pile, I'll get a little bit high. So I just snorted the whole pile. And then I shouted in his ear, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And even on the way to the bathroom, I started seeing this interference of When you're gonna faint, there's like these little red speckles. And I was kind of like, whoa, this must be a cocaine side effect. That's so cool. And I waited in line in the bathroom. It got more and more and more. By the time I was in the stall, I could only see directly in front of me. And I realized I couldn't read any of the graffiti, any of it. And also couldn't get any breath of air. It felt like all the air was breathed up in that bathroom. So I got out of the bathroom and I'm breathing and I'm not getting anything. And I really did not know I was dying. I was upset that there was no air, and I was upset about this side effect, but it never occurred to me that wasn't cocaine. It just wasn't on my radar that it wasn't cocaine. Later, after I got sober and made friends in Alcoholics Anonymous, some of them were drug dealers, and several have told me we used to cut cocaine with lidocaine back in the 80s because the lidocaine was so much cheaper. But it sounds like you got sold pure lidocaine. And lidocaine poisoning, it's an anesthetic, usually used topically, but people sometimes commit suicide by just taking a tube of lidocaine that's 5% lidocaine and swallowing it, right? Mine was pure lidocaine. And so my heart was starting to slow down and getting down to 30 beats a minute, something like that. So no matter how much I breathed, my brain was not getting oxygen. I found my date and I told him there's no air in here, there's no air. And he's like, it's fine. And I was angry, like, why aren't you noticing that there's no air? He took me to the bar and the bartender gave me a glass of water. And I really did not want a glass of water. I wanted air, but I just took a sip. And then, bam! I thought that I had collapsed and hit my chin on the bar because I felt this blow. But no, it was like Popeye had punched me and I was just shooting it straight up in the air. And there was so much relief because I was no longer oxygen starved. I don't remember breathing or anything, but I had a sense of now there's all the air I could want. And then I realized I was rocketing out from Manhattan, and I had this huge sense of relief that I was leaving behind not just that nightclub and that kind of whatever bad situation had been happening there, but that whole nonsense of being Louisa. I was just so done with that effort. It was a perfect, clear blue sky. And I sensed that the ocean was under me, perfect blue going all the way to the horizon. I made a decision that I was going to arch back and do a back bend dive. And then I could see the ocean below me, and I was diving toward it. And I thought, isn't it like concrete? Because I'm 300 feet up. Isn't that like concrete when you hit it, But I didn't have any fear. I was just like, we'll see. And so then I dove straight down. And then I could see it was way up to the surface, but the surface was gorgeous from down there, and the bubbles were going up by me, and it was all so gorgeous. And I said, man, I wonder if I can make it to the surface okay. And then there I'm there. Then I looked and I saw a mesa that came up, and on top of it was this old weather-worn house. And I thought, that house has to do with me, and I got to get there. Next thing I know, I've reached the house, but I'm at the door sill, and I'm like this high above it. I was just a subjective point of awareness, and I didn't have a body. And I crossed the threshold. Once I was over the threshold, then I knew this is the house of my ancestors, and they have all come this way through this house. And I could begin to feel my ancestors around me, grandparents, and I had a sense of a generation beyond that. And the strongest presence was my grandfather, who had died before I was born. They were all really excited to meet me, really happy that I was crossing over, ready to greet me, but I couldn't see them. I could just feel them. I didn't even hardly know who any of my ancestors were in my regular life. And people who are interested in genealogy or whatever, I was like, who cares about that? But here, I was just honored to be following in their footsteps, and with this feeling of that we go through this house. And I had a sense of we, and it was all of the people who are connected to me. I knew there was supposed to be an armchair in this room that faced a big picture window that looked out at the ocean, and it wasn't there. And I just had a sense of that's no fair. Where's the chair? And I thought, how am I going to see the view? It's beautiful. I want to see it. As soon as I thought, I want to see it, something grabbed me by the sternum that I didn't have, but a sense of where your heart is, whether you have a body or not. It grabbed me by there. He pulled me across the floor, and we went up to the windowsill and over the windowsill. When we went over the windowsill, I just felt like, whoa, what is happening? But I was very delighted by it, right? And then next thing I know, the ocean's in front of me, the sun is directly in front of me, it's setting and it's making a path that comes toward me. And I zoom over that path. And I'm flying and I'm feeling all this forward motion, and it feels delicious. But then I had a skeptical thought, and it was like, wait a second. Perfect ideal surroundings, unbelievable beauty, fabulous sensation. Am I dreaming? People dream they're flying. Is this real? And then a voice answered me. And it was very kind of deep and clear and powerful. And it said, more real than anything back there. And I knew by back there it meant in the Louisa business. And I also had not expected anyone to answer me. You wonder something, you certainly don't expect an answer. But I also had to kind of think in answer to that voice, that's true. This is more real than anything back there. So, sun started getting bigger and bigger as I got closer, and I began to even be able to see some of the patterns on the sun, and I thought, am I going to vaporize? I'm getting so close, but again, with no fear. And then instead of vaporizing, I sort of hit it, passed through this filament, and I was in the light. And it was everywhere, and I felt that it was so brilliant that all you could see was light, but I could also feel that it was in me somehow. It was light from the inside as well as from the outside, warmth from the inside, and I began to understand that it was love. I felt this sense of finally, because all my life had been jump for the cookie, try, and maybe you'll get a little crumb of love, And here I was just completely engulfed by love, completely saturated with love. And then I began to become aware that I was being cradled like an infant by some being. And in my mind's eye, the being was sitting on the ground, sort of in the way that Buddha figures sit, but holding me and just pouring, you are so loved, you are so loved. And the thing that was most is that it was, you are so loved. Not like, here's the love show we do for everybody when they come into the light. More like, I know you better than you even know yourself, and I adore you. And that feeling, I had everything I could possibly want. And I just wanted to stay there forever. I can't say how much time passed, whether it was a minute or what, but then the parent just said, you can't stay, you're not done, and went to blackness. I was baffled. I was absolutely baffled. What do you mean I can't stay? What do you mean I'm not done? So I screamed, no, with like everything in me, no. And I had a thought, like, if you remember being a little kid and thinking like, I'm going to just throw the biggest tantrum and I'm going to just like show them that they can't do this. That's how I felt. I wanted to kick. I remember thinking, I wish I could kick them in the shins. But then it just went to black instantly. So I had no recourse. In the blackness, I also had a sense of dropping. And when I felt the dropping, that's the first time I felt scared. To drop felt frightening, and I didn't know how far I was going to drop or what was going to happen. I began to see these little stick figures, and they were like chalk drawings on the background. One of the stick figures started getting closer, and somehow his circular head filled in like a dinner plate, and he's going, "How many fingers? What is your name?" Then I gradually realized he's talking to me, and then I remembered the world. When I came back to reality, all the stick figures turned into all the people in the crowd around us, right? And he was the bartender, of course. And I had just come alive again. It was the hugest bummer. I remembered I am back in the meat puppet. Everything is manual now. Everything is back to this stupid memory I have of how things worked. It was more like, you gotta be kidding. I'm not going back to this song and dance. No way. So I was lying on the ground, and there were people all around, as many as I could see, a wall of people, and I didn't quite understand why, and there was a whole lot of water around me. I thought that they had, like in the movies or whatever, thrown water on me to revive me, but it was actually sweat had just poured out of me when I came animate again. The bartender had been doing CPR on me the whole time. It was about 3 minutes. I had, from the time I took the sip, flipped backward, but into a grand mal seizure. And I had banged all around having a grand mal seizure and then cardiac arrest. And so the bartender started the CPR. He kept up with the CPR. No, CPR is not working. CPR is not working. And I turned gray, and my date says that it was so long to him that it wasn't working, and I turned so gray and looked like a corpse and nothing like myself that he had actually just told the bartender, she's gone. Just cover her up, give it up, she's gone. But he didn't. And, it's so hard to say. I never thanked him. So we all went up the stairs together, and I'm like, why are we going up the stairs? Okay, let's go up the stairs. And we sat outside, and it was in Greenwich Village, so we were sitting on this bench with our backs to the wall, and the bartender came over to talk first to my buddy, or my date, and then he turned to me, and he said, you were gone a long time. We kind of thought you weren't coming back. And in my 22-year-old mind, I put together that he'd been doing CPR with his mouth on my mouth, and this is what I thought. Ew. He's like, gotta be 30. That's so gross. I'm so embarrassed. So I'm just gonna go like, yeah, hey, yeah, that's great. That's what I did. And I was smoking my cigarettes, and it's just horrifying to me. Many years later, I just realized he had given me everything that I have. All the experience I've had, my son, I was only 22. I hadn't done anything, and he gave me my life back, and I was too busy being cool to acknowledge what had happened. All of a sudden, I put together that the ambulance was for me, and that it meant I was going to go to the hospital, and that meant my parents were going to find out that I had done cocaine and had a cardiac arrest, and that was not something my parents would approve of. So I just said to my date, please, don't make me go to the hospital, please. So he just grabbed my hand, and we just ran to the nearest taxi right there, and we jumped in, and I remember him saying, drive, just drive. In the morning, I remember having bruises all over. Back of my head was all lumpy, but most of all my sternum from the CPR. And I talked to my roommate about what had happened, and she said, so do you think that the parent thing that you said was holding you, was that like God? And I knew it was, but I just couldn't go there. I thought, if this is true, and if I went somewhere and that was pretty close to God, filling me with love, and I can remember people saying God is love and stuff like that, that means the church people are right. And that means I'll have to go to church. And I just kind of had this image of me going to church, holding the Bible, talking with other kind of dowdy, goody girls, when like Studio 54 and Columbus Ave and all these things are right there, and I've got my high heels and my miniskirts. No, I'm going this way. I'm not going to turn into some goody Christian girl. And that was kind of the decision I was making, because I could not undo who I was. It really had more to do with, this is me, this is what I believe, and if I acknowledge this is real, I have to start over from scratch. And I'm just not going to do that. So I told some people about the story as if it were a very cool hallucination. And then I just kind of put it away and tried not to think about it. But none of the memories were fading. If I thought about it, I could go back to flying over the ocean and him saying, more real than anything back there, and I could feel it again. But I just wanted it to be a hallucination so bad that I thought, okay, so for some reason I overdosed on coke and I had a cardiac arrest. So maybe as my brain got starved for oxygen, it kind of went down to one little signal at the very end, and that little spark of a signal seemed really big. It was just love is what's the last spark to go out in a brain. And I must have experienced that. So it was just a brain phenomenon, and I can put this aside and go on living the way I've been living. Years passed with nothing weird happening, and the story was just kind of a story. My alcoholism has gotten worse and worse and worse. I left a teaching job because it got in the way of my writing, but it actually got in the way of my drinking, and I bought a log cabin way out in unincorporated Thurston County, and I got a job as a barista, and I would party with all the barista kids. So I was 34, and they were in their 20s, but I had not grown up. I had no new game plan for my life. So I went to a party. I got so drunk they took my keys away and put me in a stranger's house. But I found my keys, I found my car, and I drove home completely shit-faced. I came to a place where the road narrowed to go over railroad tracks. For me, it was just like kind of a sea of I don't know how many reflective signs. I just thought, I don't care what happens, 80 miles an hour, and I just shoot for the middle. And I made it through. And I got to my log house. I got out of the car, and I remember kind of holding myself up with the door. And it was a starry night, and I just thought, man, I am such a badass when I drive drunk. And right after I had that thought, something seemed to shoot from the stars and through me and out my feet like lightning. And it was a knowing. And it said, this is the last time I can help you. And you do know right from wrong. So backwards, drunk, messed up me goes, what was that? And I felt a sense of guilt because I did know what I had done was wrong at some level, and I did know I knew better. And I tried to shake it off, but it had this intoning of truth somewhere in my core, and that resonance just wouldn't stop. So I still went drinking. I still went, and I just kept hearing, you do know right from wrong. And that's the last time I would help you. Someone's been helping me all this time, which I didn't know, but I sort of knew. So it took me another month before I went to my first AA meeting. But I did go, and that was January 29th, 1995, and I've not had a drink since. I am a completely different person now than I was at the time when I had the NDE, which is 40 years ago. So part of it is aging, but I actually think if I had aged with no direction, I'd be a bar hag somewhere. And then a lot of it is AA, because I learned a lot from listening to the old timers and so on, and just being in meetings. But there's also this component of knowing, not thinking that God is real. I think it's important not to segregate God as separate from anything else. God is a nexus of intelligence and love, which are actually the same thing, but it's in everything. So in the trees that made this chair was God. God is the energy that is everywhere. It is not useful to personify God as some dude in the sky, and it is not useful to say, well, God's the boss and then these angels are at a low. They're all the same, but I feel like my angel is a conduit for God, and then I can also be a conduit for God. And that I can always come back to as a touchstone, that my job is to leave each person I encounter a little happier than they were. And I take this in everything I do. I work one-on-one with people in my work, but I always take the time to talk to them and ask and get somehow a laughter, a human moment in our work. And people that I pass on the street, sometimes I'm in the airport and I'll get overwhelmed and I'll just say to him, I can't smile at everybody. But I feel like each person that I exchange that little spark with, if it's positive, if there's a moment of seeing we're both human and I'm saying good wishes towards you, I'm doing my job. It's hard being human. It's hard being incarnated in the meat puppet and burping stuff back and forth to each other and signals. It's just difficult. I also feel there are dark energies in the world, and that hate foments more hate. And free will is a big deal. We can destroy the world by choosing hate. We do know right from wrong. And I could have smashed my brains open on a tree or a telephone pole. That's what he was saying. You're free to do that, to destroy yourself if you want. But you do know right from wrong, and you can move forward. Same thing as a whole human race. We have these horrible hate makes hate conflicts going on in the world, but we deeper down know that love is what we're going for. So God wants us to find the path to love. I think that Martin Luther King nailed it when he said, hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And our survival-based limbic system tells us, no, hit them harder than they hit you, But Jesus was trying to say, give them your coat too. It's trying to say, turn it around and find a way to love. And that's what Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, all these people who've changed the world, did it by seeing, no, you don't hit back. You love back so that the other person sees they were wrong to hit you.